Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Wild Scientist. My name is Ryleigh Hickman, and today I'm going to be giving you a little insight into the past of our ancestors. Today, I want to talk about what we have been able to learn from hominin fossils and our evolution to walking on two legs. When I say hominins, I refer to the species regarded as being human or very closely related, such as ancestors. In this episode, I will be focusing in on a study about the evolution of the hand morphology, or the makeup of the hand, in hominin ancestors that was recently published and explains the role it may play in researching the evolution of bipedalism. But in order to explain the findings of this article, it will be helpful to understand a little bit of background on bipedal theories and the main hominins studied in the article. First off, to even know where to get started with this episode, I wanted to get a little peek inside other students' minds around ISU on what they know about human evolution and our ancestors. So I walked around ISU's quad to ask around. Know anything about anthropology?
No, I know absolutely nothing.
Okay. Do you know anything about anthropology?
I do not.
That's okay. Do you know anything about anthropology?
I know it has to do with monkeys and rock records.
I want to get the record straight. Anthropology is the study of humans, and paleoanthropology specifically seeks to study hominin fossils and use them in the study of the evolution of humans. Now, back to these questions. Any significant scientists in the field of evolution that you know?
Charles Darwin.
What do you know about human evolution or who we evolved from? Any significant scientists in the field of evolution that you know?
I know Charles Darwin pretty well. That was my man back in AP Bio. I know about the bird experiment, but I don't know much about human evolution. I know more about animal evolution.
What do you know about human evolution or who we evolved from, and any significant scientists in the field of evolution that you know?
I don't know anything, but I've seen the evolution picture of the monkeys, and I know Charles Darwin.
Obviously, Charles Darwin is very well known. Both him and Thomas Henry Huxley wrote about the process of evolution and ideas of adaptation, selecting for certain traits that would help with survival. Charles Darwin, as you can tell, is probably the most well-known scientist involved in evolution. However, he was not involved in the evolution of humans. So why would he be important to mention in an episode talking about human evolution? I'll get right back to that. First, let's answer a few more questions. What do you think makes humans humans, or what differentiates humans from other mammals?
I'm not quite sure, but first thing that comes to my mind is that we don't fend for ourselves. We don't kill our own food or just eat it raw like other mammals do.
So agriculture?
Yeah.
What makes humans human, or what differentiates humans from other mammals, in your opinion?
That we can actually talk, and we have legs and arms and thumbs that you can use. I don't know.
What do you think makes humans human, or what differentiates humans from other mammals?
The amount of chromosomes? ? Also just the way we communicate.
Why do you think we walk bipedally, so on two legs instead of four?
Because we decided that we created a bunch of stuff where you need to walk on 2 feet. You need to be able to walk on 2 feet.
Why do you think we evolved to walk bipedally on two legs instead of four?
I'm gonna guess that it's an evolutionary advantage for us to be faster.
Why do you think we evolved to walk bipedally?
One guess I have is just to keep our brain elevated.
Why do you think we walk bipedally, so on two legs instead of four?
So that we could carry our own children? Carry other things other than our own children?
There are some really interesting answers, and really not that far off. Most scientists or paleoanthropologists would attribute walking on two legs to be one of the first signs of humanity. We have made some really good theories about bipedal evolution, but these theories can only be backed up by evidence. And although he was not involved in human evolution, a very well-known theory was proposed by Charles Darwin, and is strikingly similar to one of the answers we heard. He made the guess that we became bipedal in order to make our hands available, either for tool use, food picking, or holding our young. Some really helpful evidence to narrow down our theories would be to find out exactly when it was that we began to change from living in the trees to living on the ground. These same questions that I asked are what scientists have been asking for centuries. There's so much fossil evidence now, but without any sort of dating or understanding where humans fit in our journey to evolution, bones didn't amount to much. So, two scientists, Vincent Sarek and Alan Wilson, attempted to figure out an answer to at least one question. Who are we most closely related to? These scientists use a new approach to determine when humans diverged from other apes. They drew from the molecular clock hypothesis. The molecular clock hypothesis is the idea that DNA and protein sequences evolve at a rate that is relatively constant over time and among different organisms. Derek and Wilson used the proteins albumin, transferrin, and hemoglobin, as well as DNA samples, to compare humans with other mammals and see which mammals showed to be most similar to humans. They determined chimpanzees to be the closest living hominid to humans and found that humans and chimpanzees shared a common ancestor 4.5 to 6 million years ago. Narrowing down the ancestor we last had in common to these other mammals helps us to understand the trajectory of our own evolution. Knowing that the time frame for the last common ancestor to humans and chimpanzees allows us to focus on fossils dated to this time period, who could have been this exact ancestor. In 1994, 25 years after the molecular timescale for human evolution was published, fossils dated to 4.4 million years ago were discovered. This find proved to be the most complete of its species, named Ardipithecus ramidus, and the specific fossil was nicknamed Ardi. This is where my questions about bipedalism and evolution come into focus. An article entitled Ardipithecus hand provides evidence that humans and chimpanzees evolved from an ancestor with suspensory adaptations. A long title, I know, was published by Thomas C. Prang and his colleagues at Texas A&M University. In their study, they explained that by studying Ardipithecus ramidus, or Ardi, and comparing that data to other living and non-living primates, including later ancestors of humans, Prang believes we can make more educated hypotheses on the purpose of bipedalism and understand more about when it was necessary to form in our lineage. It's an interesting take because most people wouldn't assume that hand morphology has anything to do with bipedalism. But, as you know, Charles Darwin believed it just might. Bipedalism has to do with feet, so why would we be studying hands? Well, by learning more about the morphology of the hands our ancestors had, we can learn much more about our path to bipedal evolution. This is due to the fact that if our ancestors were walking around on the ground more than they were swinging from the branches of trees, they would start to adapt more to terrestrial life, and aspects of these adaptations would likely be evident in the whole of the fossil, including their hands. By studying these fossils, we can begin to measure the slow changes of evolution of bipedalism. This study makes the suggestion that since at this point in hominid evolution we were still suspensory, or hanging out in the trees, we were likely not fully bipedal. It points to another study done in 2010 entitled The Coevolution of Human Hands and Feet, which states that due to the similarity of the morphology of human hands and feet, they probably evolved at the same time. This makes complete sense. Just look at the skeletons of hands and feet. The bones are incredibly similar and are even named the same things. Phalanges for your fingers and your toes, and then in the hands, metacarpals and carpals until you get to the wrist, and in your feet, metatarsals and tarsals until you get to your ankle. In this study, they began by using a multitude of tests called Principal Components Analysis, or PCAs for short. Prang and his team compared the hand bones of Ardi to other primates to see where the measurements of the bone would fall in comparison. They also ran another test, this time focusing on the joints of the hand and their shape. Joints would be incredibly informative of how Ardi used its hands. Different shapes and the stress put on these joints would show how well adapted this primate was to life in the trees or life on the ground. All of these tests pointed to Ardi being well adapted to life in the trees and using the suspensory adaptations for its survival. Because of this, Ardi was very unlikely to be an obligate biped, meaning they didn't rely entirely on walking long distances in the way modern humans do. Most likely, they walked upright the same way chimpanzees do, with an awkward gait. Knowing this gives us a lot more insight as to when bipedalism evolved in hominids. It had to have been after Ardipithecus, meaning later than 4.4 million years ago. By narrowing down the time it took humans to evolve into obligate bipeds, we can now begin to narrow down the theories of why they became this way in the first place. Theories that proposed a much longer evolutionary path can now be thrown out the window, and we can focus on those that line up with the new timescale. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Wild Scientist. Join us next time to continue expanding your knowledge of the world and its complexities.